Well, welcome, Taylor, and thank you for joining us on the Paid Media Playbook. How are you this morning?
Doing well. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to our discussion.
Us too. Would you start by telling our listeners a little bit of your background with paid media?
Sure. Yeah, happy to. And it's definitely I've been involved in paid media throughout my entire career, 15 plus years in marketing and sales. I started out really in what's called new media. I think I was on a political campaign, and so they gave me the coin new media. So I've always really been in the social and digital world, less traditional.
Mhm.
So my context is from that, and then also really focused on early stage organizations. So like I mentioned, I worked in politics, but I also worked in some B2C companies. And then for the past 10 years, I've been working in B2B companies, early stage paid media. So a lot of my, past couple, 5-10 years has been from the paid media side, lead generation, probably been the main focus is how do we drive leads and obviously book demos and things like that, bottom of the funnel stuff. But that's been the main focus. And I know we'll get into kind of some of the challenges that I've been facing or I've seen in my career. But yeah, some context for the audience on where I'm coming from.
And you have your own agency now, is that correct? Potential Opportunity?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So yeah, I do fractional demand generation work for B2B early stage companies. So I do have a small team of a couple freelancers, but it's mostly me. And so I act as a head of demand gen for early stage companies, fractional head of demand gen. And yeah, encompasses a little bit of everything. So paid media is part of it. I also do outbound partnerships, content, customer advocacy. And so kind of all those are the kind of and paid media, the 5 buckets of demand gen is how I think about it. And paid media is a really important part of that. But it's also what I found is if you don't get the other 4 buckets right, or the 3 buckets really, paid media becomes a lot harder, which we can talk about that more today too.
Yeah.
Did we ask you what is your ideal client?
Yeah, it's usually between like 1 and 5 million in revenue, B2B, software or service organization. So most of them are software companies I work with a lot, but I do work with some service-based organizations. They're a service provider, or they serve other businesses through services, but also software too. A lot of enterprise deals. So like there's like PLG motions, which are like, probably under 5K annual deal sizes, right? So kind of smaller, high velocity. I work in kind of the upper end of like higher deal sizes. So like 50, 25 to kind of 6 figures, which is gets into the like ABM, account-based marketing world.
Yep.
And we can talk about paid media in that realm too, as far as like one-to-one, one-to-few, one-to-many, and those concepts. But mostly enterprise, B2B, software service, kind of in that early stage, 1 to 5 million. They don't have enough money to hire a CMO or a head of marketing or head of demand, but they need the expertise, right? So they may have a small marketing team, or maybe they have like a junior marketer on their team and need somebody to come in and provide the leadership, provide the strategy, and also help execute.
Absolutely, yeah. It's funny.
This is great. This is like a perfect sales pitch. I'm gonna take this and use this for an ad. No, joking.
Most of our clients are B2C, but I got to play around with Terminus last year, an ABM, which was
cool.
So fascinating how it's like almost exactly the same, but not quite as a different DSP. All of the strategy and, A to B testing and optimizations are basically the same concept, but like what you're actually doing is so different.
Interesting. Yeah. And actually, I've never even heard of the DSP term. You mind educating me on that?
It's an ABM DSP. So it works really closely with CRM information.
And a DSP it means demand side platform.
Got it.
So it's basically talking to the supply side, which talks to the publishers of all the websites.
Got it. Yeah, you're right. And for the ABM side, I think those audiences are great, especially for just getting brand awareness. And obviously you can do it, on paid social and things like that too. But yeah, really cool. Yeah, small world. There's so many crossovers. I think what's interesting is for the B2C, for the audience that are listening, like B2C and B2B, what I've realized starting in B2C was that there's a lot to learn from both sides. I think B2C can learn from like B2B and being more personalized, one-to-one, like hyper-personalized, right? Whereas B2B can learn a few things about like maybe storytelling or creative or entertainment, things that I think B2C does really well from a marketing side, where you're like, they have, even my wife and I were watching Netflix last night and an ad came up and I had this epiphany. I was like, it's a 15-second ad, right? I was like, I don't remember the last time I created a 15-second ad for the B2B world, which is probably a problem, number one.
Right.
But just that time, that obviously being entertaining, that the short attention spans,
Agreed.
but a lot to learn. I think B2C can learn more about that personalization though, because the best B2B marketers out there are they're targeting one account. Every single message is tailored to their specific problems, their specific needs. So yeah, I've always thought
that's a great comparison. No, that is a great comparison. I'm thinking about it now, and I'm like, yeah, that's true. I mean, we're always struggling between reach and personalization and creative. That you would have to go out and because you are not focusing on maybe one, so you kind of have to. It has to be broad enough, but it's tough with B2C, but B2B, when we take those on, and it is always like, you got to make a 15, because it's how people consume it now. It's just how people consume video anywhere. So and that I think that entertainment and that being I've thought a lot about this idea and worked especially in the B2B side, and I think B2C does a great job of this. I'm sure you're all familiar with engagement marketing or even experiential marketing, right? So experiential is like a fancy word for, events I think falls underneath that. And B2B has done a great job, and I've done a ton of work in the event space and experiential marketing, and really powerful for creating that relationship. I think we just need to create more short form versions of that, really either great experiences. And I think in general, one of the biggest takeaways I've learned in my career has really been, how do you create great experiences for people, right? And how do you create a great buying experience, a great all the way from pre-customer, right? Because people talk about customer experience, it's usually post them buying, but sales and marketing is so focused on closing deals that sometimes we forget about the experience. And the B2B world, there's a lot of money to be made. Margins, especially in the software space, gross margins are 80%, right? I don't think there's any industry, maybe pharmaceuticals is the one that has that high of gross margins. So they have a ton of money to spend on sales and marketing, which creates unfortunately this conflict of interest to focus on experience, right? Because you're focusing on, how do I close deals? Because I have a ton of money to spend on marketing and sales. I can kind of just throw money at it to grow. There's definitely been a shift over the past couple of years with the markets and fundraising and all that fun stuff. But anywho, how do you tend to so you have the money, it's just saying, hey, we just have to produce this. We were going to ask about that with startups, but because you're at a slightly higher level, you have enough to target your customers, your B2B customers. It sounds like you just have to, be strategic. And since it's so niche, it's kind of easy. Am I right? It's easier than this broad swath that you're putting out there. You just need sales teams to go after them. Is that?
I would say historically that's been the case. Yeah, I would say if you were to ask me 5 years ago or 7 years ago, I would say yes. Yeah, sure. Just throw money at it. Who cares what? Yeah, it doesn't matter. You just spend as quickly as possible, really. And that's where the overemphasis on sales teams, which don't get me started on that, as far as sales teams, people hired sales teams to create demand, but sales teams really aren't necessarily the most efficient ways to create demand, right? Maybe we're marketers, so we have a bias towards that. But to answer your question, I'd say now it isn't that way. I think most companies, you don't have, unless you're a large company, if you're Salesforce or something, yeah, sure, you can go spin up your own owned media, Salesforce Plus, and create this amazing online owned media experience, or have Dreamforce or whatever. But I think for the startups, for folks that are, pre-product market fit, or just even under 100 million in revenue, right? You just have so many more constraints. You don't have the ability to throw it. And then we're also dealing with a couple market shifts in the aspect of competition.
Right.
So in the B2B space, an average SaaS platform has anywhere from 14 to 17 competitors, depending on which stat you look at. So you have so many more competitors now than you did 7-10 years ago. Add on to that, you also have AI, which is, not only I think, AI is going to have which we could talk about a little bit today too, around creative or paid media, which would be interesting. But AI is also a form of competition in the sense that they're going to, people are creating software faster now because of AI. So that means there's going to be more tools out there. It's going to replace some service jobs. And so the competition, I think, which actually I think most people don't talk about, actually. And I think this year, 2024, 2025, especially in my world, competitor ads and actually going to market to educate the market on how you're different from your competitors.
Yeah.
I think is super important because everyone has a competitor now. So you have less money to grow. You have less money to spend on sales and marketing. You have more competition. And then we can also talk about all the diminishing returns on all the paid media. From what I'm seeing, I've seen a lot of diminishing returns on especially like paid social, paid search, where every year there's a couple little, channels. Every once in a while, there's a little like, oh, here's a, arbitrage opportunity. But generally speaking, every year it seems to get a little bit more expensive, a little bit harder, and you have to get more creative and whatnot. So you have these kind of 3 factors, and then AI. So there's like 4 factors, right, that make, I think, go to market way harder. And then paid media in particular, probably that much less, just that much more challenging, because that's always where people go to first, right, to spend money. It's like, hey, it's relatively easy to spin up, right?
Yes.
Maybe not the right way, but it is easy to go turn them on. And so people just dump money on that. And then they also, I think, like attribution, and they've done a great job. Google, Meta have done a great job and LinkedIn have done a great job of telling us that you are getting great performance of paid media, when in all reality, who knows? Like, especially in B2B, where you have like sales cycles that can be multi-year long, right? Who knows? B2C, if you have like a 30-day sales cycle or a 15-day or 10-day or 5-day or whatever, a little different. But yeah, especially B2B, where you're like dealing with really long buying cycles, you're like, so I don't know. I think there's a lot there.
Yeah, that is true. Do you feel like in B2B, like one way to stand out, do you do like a lot of testimonials or expert, like, I'm just curious what the creative typically is, like the thing you would recommend most to B2B. It just depends on the customer, I'm sure. But like, what do you find yourself doing when you, like, if you had to make a 15 for most of your clients, would it be something like a testimonial or?
Great question. And thanks for asking. Yeah, I think it really depends. I mean, there's obviously like the top, middle, bottom funnel, frameworks for content. And I still think those are great. And those are really applicable in a lot of ways. I think for the B2B side, especially since the sales cycles are so long, it's very like, it's not relationship based, but it's relationship influenced. So relationships are so important. So to your point, customers, influencers, strategic partners, even employee advocacy, those areas, like, I think are hugely impactful when it comes to your marketing, right? No one really cares about what we have to say. Like, we're all biased. Right? We're marketers, salespeople. We're selling a product. Like, no one really cares about what we have to say. So I think customer advocacy, customer testimonials, hugely important. But also influencers, strategic partners, centers of influence is, I think, an older school term for what we're talking about here. But yeah, centers of influence. How do you get folks that have the relationship with your ideal customer? How do you get them to advocate? How do you get them to promote? So there's part of that. I would say that's table stakes, right? Like, you got to have, if you don't have people that are recommending you in your 15-second or even longer creative, whatnot, then you're totally missing out. I think in conjunction with that, what I've seen the most also really effective is really thought leadership ads and thought leadership in general. And this is where, it kind of goes beyond the 15-second short, ads, but it goes more into how do we provide value outside of our product. And this is where I've built my entire career, really the past 10 years, and everything I've done that's been successful is always kind of goes back to this, which is
make a podcast.
Make a podcast. Exactly. Hey, we're doing it right now. And we're strategic partners. We're both, we're leveraging each other's networks. Yeah. It's a great, very super meta, but super accurate, right? Like, we're doing co-marketing right now. We're creating thought leadership, all sorts of fun stuff. So 100% agreed. I think thought leadership, it's a term that's kind of been dragged through the mud, I think, in some ways. So I like to think about it in the sense of like, how do you help people solve a problem? How do you create impact pre-customer?
Right.
So that could be like in the B2B world, that could be product-led growth, where you giving somebody a free trial or a freemium experience, an introductory tool, whatever. For enterprise, it could be a proof of concept. It could be a salesperson coming in with a consultative perspective, right? Where they're actually like, hey, you know what? Why don't you do this, right? When they're doing a demo versus just pitching the product. Huge opportunity there for salespeople. Like, the best salespeople I've ever interacted with have been people that actually help people solve a problem in a sales interaction versus just positioning their product. You got to do both. But if you can build that relationship, build that trust, you'll set yourself apart. And then in marketing, there's just a ton of ways to do it, right? Like, there's obviously the product side, which we talked about, like creating a smaller version of your product, but there's content, there's simple tools. and really how do you create, and then if you can create content that's both, like if you want to say, like if you want to hear the best content I've ever seen work is you combine social proof and you combine thought leadership. So an example of this could be you could host an event where you have your customer come on a panel with other customers or prospects even, which is really fun to do, where you have prospects and customers on a panel. You do a thought leadership discussion where you go through, a relevant topic and you get their expertise, you share with the audience, right? You get value for the audience. Inevitably, every single time, I kid you not, the customer that's on that panel is going to bring up your product. Right. So now you get this natural social proof, which is, I mean, let's be honest, like I was reading a testimony yesterday and I was like, this is the most canned testimony I've ever read in my life. It was like AI wrote it basically. And I think actually a lot of testimonials are like that because it's, you kind of fine tune every little bit of the testimonial, or you edit the case study video to make it like really like perfect sounding.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And it's super unnatural, And so I think what's really cool is getting that natural social proof where it's like not staged. It's really natural. And it's like, they kind of joke about it. It's like, well, I don't want to position, I don't want to sell the product, but we are customers of them, and this is how we solve this problem.
But it's more of a talking head with a name underneath, and so you're saying it's so canned versus being right there with somebody and having a conversation.
Totally, way more natural, and you're also providing value in that experience too through the thought leadership, right? So it's like they immediately win, but then they're like, oh, cool, so you helped me solve one of these problems. And here's the concept that it kind of always boils down to: is if you can help somebody solve one problem, they're more likely to come to you to solve more problems on top of that, right? It's kind of reciprocity, but it's a little bit different in this. It's more of this unconditional serving somebody. We're like, hey, I can help you with this problem.
Yeah.
Now I built the trust, which is like the name of the game in business in general, but especially in B2B where people's careers are on the line. You're making hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars, purchasing decisions. So huge stakes. And so, if you can create, ultimately that experience, super powerful.
Cool.
Well, you mentioned earlier how paid media is only one bucket of the bigger picture. What would you say is a green flag that someone is ready to start paid media that would be beneficial to them?
Great question, Lisa. Thank you. Yeah, a good flag. I would say, paid media can help, with ideation and ultimately getting feedback quickly. So I won't say this is a hard and fast rule because you can like go to market really quickly with paid media and start getting feedback on creative, getting feedback on what's working, what's not working, what's resonating with the audience. But in general, some best practices I would have is have a website. No, just joking. Yeah. Have have a lot of your like.
That's funnel. Not just for investors or Okay.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Actually have a website that talks about your problems and your solutions and has resources and has testimonials and social proof and all those things. But have a lot of your, I would say some of your baseline, funnel stuff where you hey, if somebody enters in, what's the next step in their journey, right? Some of that customer journey mapping figured out, which is you need a little bit of it's like attribution. I always make these jokes for attribution. Right. Attribution and customer journey, you kind of need a little bit of black magic and a little bit of sorcery to figure them out, because you're having to you're having to do a lot of guesswork and put a lot of things together.
As if it's something that hasn't been tested and isn't tried and true, it's kind of okay, well, we'll see. Yeah.
100%. Okay. Yeah. Especially if you're early stage. Yeah. Great point, Laura. If you've been around for 10 years and you have a ton of data and you can kind of map attribution and customer journey, then it comes a lot easier. If you're year 2 and you don't have a lot of, and you're scaling and you're doing new things, it becomes a lot more challenging. So thinking those things through, customer journey, thinking through kind of some of those core fundamentals. I would say having that customer advocacy, like we talked about, testimonials, case studies, social proof, and then content in general. And what I mean by content, that one of those 5 buckets, there's kind of 2 parts of it. There's the brand content, which we've just talked about a little bit, with website, stuff like that. You need to have some brand content, some product content, right? You have to have something. Somebody comes to your website or whatever. They know what you do. They know, what's your strategic narrative, what's your positioning, how do you compare to competitors, all that fun stuff. So you need to have that brand. I would say stakes minimum would be customer advocacy and then that brand product content. And then ideally, you would have some that kind of part 2 of that content, the brand and product. Part 2 of that would be the thought leadership side of content. So when you go to market with your paid media, especially on the B2B side, when somebody hits your website, it's not just book a demo. There maybe is more of a transition, CTA where it's like, hey,
Right.
Join an event, download this ebook, whatever. So, and I think actually in general, especially for early stage companies, like if you don't, I don't know, I'm less and less convinced unless you're like Elon Musk, where you can create, you have a product that's so differentiated in the market, right? And I think that's what he's done a great job of, like the innovation side. He's a great example of somebody that's an innovator. Like him or hate him or love him,
Right,
he's done a great job of being an innovator,
sure.
right? He's also a great marketer. As a side note, he's a great example of a marketer, and he literally bought a social network. So he has those things. But unless you're just the most innovative product in the world, right? And let's be honest, like 99% of us mere mortals, we don't have the most innovative products in the world. We're not the most differentiated. We're not the only one that does what we do in our space, right? There's probably at least a couple folks that are similar to what you do.
Yeah.
And so I think the key there is like, unless you just have that product, it's just like no one else can do it, and you've spent 15 years with R&D, creating this the most
developing
unique thing,
this proprietary
which is like literally
thing.
Exactly, which is exactly what Elon Musk did, right? Like he was failing for a very long time until it all worked out, and he spent hundreds of millions of dollars to get there. So unless you have that, I think that you have to like provide value, and that's where that like thought leadership like how do you build that relationship? How do you tap into that and provide value? Because if you don't, I think you're just not going to build that relationship fast enough. And yeah, sure, get that brand content, get that product content, differentiate yourself. But I think what I found successful is like people buy from people still, especially in the B2B space. I know that term is kind of overused in some ways, but I think it's actually only going to get even more people buy from people, especially in the B2B, because AI is going to make everything like, we're not going to be able to trust anything anymore. We already have a hard time trusting the news or what's on social media. AI is only going to make it even weirder.
Yes.
So I think like people are going to buy from people even more.
I think you're right. I do. I think relationship more than paid media on the B2B side is definitely, because you don't really know what you're always looking at. I mean, having a great website, though, if you are going to do it, that's really important, I think, as far as just funneling, let alone the podcast or these other thought, positioning yourself. So all this positioning, right? And then you go out and do some sort of paid media. Let's say you're doing LinkedIn to all of these people who work in this industry. Would that be an example of a paid strategy that you would use?
Yeah, that's a great example. Yeah, I think LinkedIn's awesome. I think LinkedIn, I've built my career on it. Like I have a great following there, and I've anecdotally seen a ton of benefits. And then for my clients as well, I think organically and from the paid side, it's phenomenal. The paid side, I love their thought leadership. Ironically, little funny, not ironic. It's very strategic on their part. About last time, I forget what time last year, the thought leadership ads came out on LinkedIn, where you can run thought leadership ads, which are super cool. They come in, it's like it's an individual. You can basically run ads through individuals now, and they're really focused on like value added, video or long form text. And right when they released that, they started throttling or pulling back on organic reach. Go figure, right? They wanted you to start investing in their thought leadership ads, paid, versus organic, which has been like a gold mine for the past couple, 5 or so years on LinkedIn, or since inception probably on LinkedIn. The organic has become a lot harder. But yeah, paid media on LinkedIn is great. I would also say like I love Meta, and if you can get the targeting right, and if you can get targeting, that's the thing. Like with B2B is like you're not like all my clients have like less than a 5,000 account TAM, right? Like usually smaller, and some of them are even smaller than that, like 400, 500 accounts they're going after, super small. And so if you can get the targeting right on Meta and even Google, programmatic and display and stuff like that, and there's some great tools out there, and you can get the data to kind of target those folks. That's where I found a ton of gains, because it's like, a third of the cost of LinkedIn. LinkedIn's super expensive.
That's what
ridiculously expensive.
We were doing it programmatically outside of, through our DSP for some of our, and that seems to be an easy way to test too. Yeah. And less expensive than LinkedIn for sure.
Cool. And you're doing that, you just like the programmatic display ads and stuff like that.
And video, like video. Short 15-second thought leadership type video, where you can, or testimonials, I went and used this and I, as for B2B, when we've done our B2B stuff, let's say we have to target doctors or we have to target people in this, niche healthcare industry or human resource departments or
very cool.
Yeah. Anyway.
I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. And I think there's display and I think even connected TV, we've been playing around with that. And there's a lot of cool I think those are kind of some of the arbitrages I'm seeing of like, oh, here's some opportunity to kind of
I agree. There's some neat stuff out there now that you can target on zip code. So if there's an area of people that are just like, okay, we just want to hear this tech zip code. I'm sure it's like, Silicon Valley, like zip codes are like super expensive in tech, right?
And there's creative things. I think I love that. And I think there's creative, like if you're doing a conference, right? I think that geofencing, or if you're going to a conference, you can geofence, or if you're doing, if there's like, I've seen, I haven't done them personally, but I know people that have done like really targeted campaigns if they're trying to like get a certain part of Manhattan, right? Like there's a bunch of companies in this, maybe a little tech sector in Manhattan, and then you can do all that awesome out of home and ads and stuff like that. So super cool. I love that. And it definitely becomes, I think the targeting is definitely a challenge on the B2B side, and making sure you're targeting, because that's where, especially if you have like an expensive, I've seen where people waste so much money on LinkedIn. And I think all the platforms love, they're always like, hey, do the expanded version of whatever you're doing.
Yeah.
And usually that's not a good
network.
Exactly. It's usually not, not all their recommendations are bad, but a lot of times the recommendations are self-serving, and I don't blame them, they got a business to run, but, and sometimes it makes sense. Like if you have a broad, and especially like I know, and I love to hear, I don't know if you guys do a lot with Meta or Facebook, but their algorithm has gotten phenomenal. It seems like over the past, their conversion tracking is crazy. Ever since like Apple has, the privacy, and Google with cookies and everything like that. Which I don't know if you saw yesterday, Google extended.
The cookies
crazy
start in 2025 now at some point.
We got another year, or depending on what side of
I was kind of hoping fourth quarter or third quarter, just because of like all the political stuff. Like the less cookies we have, I feel like the less people could be like as polarized. I mean, you know what I mean? Like
that's a great point.
Like we're just there. Everybody's just going to be followed down their own little path right into their voting booth and never see the other side. Anyway.
Yeah, totally. Exactly. Yeah. And I completely agree. As a consumer, I'm pretty happy about a lot of the privacy moves and just the general, like, as much as I'm a marketer, I'm obviously still a consumer. And I think I have a lot of concerns about the future of AI or technology in general. And I think privacy, is good in a lot of ways. And I think there's creative ways to still, reach your audience in a way that they want to be reached too. I think that's also a way, like thinking back, is people get inundated with so many ads, and like big picture, like maybe take, I think using a lot of empathy and a lot of self-awareness to understand, like, how does this message affect, like if somebody is, if somebody is, if the frequency is too high on your ad, right? And you're just saturating these people, like people aren't going to like that, right?
Yeah.
Or if your contents aren't thoughtful, or if you're, or is not helpful and it's just annoying, or your sales team doesn't follow up. Like there's all these different things where it's like, really creating that great, amazing experience is something that I don't think we talk about. We talk about conversions a lot. We don't really talk about experience. So you have a lot of competing forces that are making it harder to go to market.
Yeah.
But still a lot of, I think there's still a lot of positive things. And I think going back to that experience, and if you can create a better experience, if you can reduce your time to value, that concept, if you can think about your product, your marketing, your sales, especially in the B2B, but and B2C too, I think like, how can you get the sample in front of them as quickly as possible, right? So they can taste and experience it. How can you get them to buy it? How can you extend your return policy so they can experience it longer, right? And B2C, there's a ton of different ways to do it, but the B2B side, that time to value, that's where product-led growth came out of. Like, how do we reduce that time to value? Marketing and sales can be a part of that. They can do that by providing helpful content. They can do that by providing consultative selling through paid media. You can do that through, thought leadership ads and providing. You can do that through creating events and inviting people to events, communities, partnerships. There's also different ways where you can provide value and just reduce it. And the people that, deliver value the fastest in market, I think are going to win, right? Like that's literally all of Amazon's entire foundation is they've reduced the time to value. They don't really create anything. Like none of their products, and in fact, a lot of the products they do create, I don't think are even the best in the industry, right? Like there's other folks that make better products.
Yeah.
But their entire model is how do we deliver it? How do we reduce that time to value and deliver products and services faster?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, we're about at time. Taylor, thank you so much for joining us.
Super
Before
fun.
we let you go, one last question. If you could give yourself at the beginning of your career one piece of advice, what would it be?
Yeah, great question. I think I probably will just reiterate what I just said. It's about that, customer experience, time to value. How do you serve? I do think there's a concept that in my second book I'll write someday is called the selfless advantage. And it's actually really about this idea of, it's not about reciprocity where you give to somebody and expectance that they return it, they return the favor. It's actually about how do you serve unconditionally and without expectation. And if you can do that, I think you live a better life, number one, right? Like you just have you build more relationships, you have more fun, but you also reduce your cost of acquisition. Your sales cycle gets reduced and everything just improves when you go with that mindset of how do you serve. So that selfless advantage. How do you be selfless in every interaction? And it's not hard to do that in sales and marketing because we actually, by definition, are the most selfish departments out of anyone in the org. Our goal is revenue, right?
Yeah.
And nothing wrong with that, but it's customer success, product, R&D, all of them are really focused on the customer, and their whole thing is the customer. We're more focused on revenue. So I think there's a ton of opportunity for people to kind of come in and focus on experience, be selfless. Yes, that
Got
one.
it.
And it's not about not caring about revenue. It's not about not focusing on driving end results.
But believing in what you do, I think helps a lot to be selfless because you're I'm helping you. I get to help you.
Totally.
I get to do that.
Is a huge part of that, knowing that your product actually you believe and you've seen it, right? You've seen your product work. And then how do you take a little bit of that product and deliver it in marketing and sales, right? A little bit through content, through whatever it is. And build that relationship, build that trust. It's a heck of a lot more fun than just pushing people through a funnel. And you get way better results, I found.
Cool.
Right on.
Thank you.